The water gurgled down the drain as Sarah watched 20,000 gallons disappear into the earth. 3 months of drought, 3 months of her neighbor Karen's poisonous glares, and now this, the sound of sirens cutting through the summer. Heat. Karen stood at the property line, arms crossed, a vindictive smile spreading across her face as 2 police cruisers pulled into Sarah's driveway. "Officer, I'm telling you, she's stealing our water." Karen's voice carried across the yard like a battle cry. But what Karen didn't know was that Sarah had been waiting for this moment. The pool wasn't the only thing that was about to be exposed. Sarah Martinez pressed her palm against the rough concrete edge of her swimming pool and watched the last few inches of chlorinated water spiral down the main drain. The sound was oddly satisfying, a liquid whisper that seemed to mock the sweltering. August heat pressing down on suburban Phoenix like a suffocating blanket. 23,000 gallons, she whispered to herself, running quick calculations in her head. At $4 per thousand gallons, she just flushed nearly $100 literally down the drain. But it was worth it. Every damn penny. The drought had been brutal this summer. 3 months without meaningful rainfall, water restrictions, tightening like a noose around the neighborhood's perfectly manicured lawns. The city had banned pool filling, car washing, and even watering gardens except on designated days. But Sarah's pool had been full since March, before the restrictions. Hit. Perfectly legal. Perfectly hers. That hadn't stopped Karen Whitmore from making it her personal crusade. Sarah glanced toward the 6-foot privacy fence separating her property from the Whitmores. Even now, she could see the woman's blonde head, bobbing above the fence line as Karen stood on what had to be a ladder or step stool, conducting her daily surveillance routine. The woman had turned nosiness into an art form. You know she's watching, right? Sarah turned to see her 16-year-old daughter Emma emerging from the sliding glass door, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hands. Emma had inherited her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn streak, a dangerous combination that had served her well in high school debate club and made her a force to be reckoned with when she set her mind to something. "Let her watch," Sarah said, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "She's about to get quite a show." Emma settled into one of the patio chairs, her eyes following her mother's gaze to the fence. "Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, draining the pool seems kind of extreme." "Extreme?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know what's extreme? Having that woman call the city inspector on us 6 times in 2 months. Having her report us to the HOA for excessive water usage when we haven't filled the pool once since March. Having her start a neighborhood petition to investigate suspicious water consumption patterns like we are running some kind of criminal enterprise." The sliding door opened again, and Marcus emerged, still wearing his work clothes despite the heat. Sarah's husband moved with the deliberate precision of someone who'd spent 20 years as an electrical engineer, every action calculated and purposeful. Even his tie remained perfectly knotted despite the 100-degree temperature. "The pumps. Officially disconnected," he said, mopping his face with a handkerchief. "And I've documented everything with photos and timestamps. The pool company will be here Monday morning to start repairs." Sarah nodded. The repairs were actually unnecessary. The pool's filtration system worked perfectly fine. But the work order would provide the perfect cover for what she was really planning. "Did you see Karen's face when the water truck left this morning?" Emma asked, grinning. "I thought she was going to climb over the fence and demand to see receipts." The water truck had been Sarah's masterstroke. $40 to have a small delivery truck park in her driveway for 30 minutes, just long enough for Karen to notice and draw her own conclusions. The driver had thought Sarah was crazy when she explained she just needed him to park there and pretend to make a delivery, but $40 was $40. Marcus loosened his tie and joined them on the patio. "You know she's probably calling the city again right now." "Let her," Sarah said. "I've got copies of every permit, every bill, every piece of documentation going back to when we moved in 5 years ago. The pool was installed legally, filled legally, and maintained legally. Karen Whitmore can call every government agency in Arizona if she wants to. It won't change the facts." But even as she spoke, Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. Karen hadn't just stopped at official complaints. The woman had a gift for making life miserable in small, petty ways that somehow felt more devastating than any formal accusation. The anonymous note to Emma's school counselor suggesting the family might be experiencing financial difficulties. The complaints to the mail carrier about packages being suspiciously heavy and possibly containing restricted materials. The way conversations stopped when Sarah walked into the grocery store, as if Karen's poison had seeped into the entire community. She's insane, Emma said, voicing what they were all thinking. I mean, clinically insane. Who obsesses over their neighbor's pool like this? Someone who doesn't have enough going on in her own life, Marcus replied, but Sarah caught the edge in his voice. Her husband was a patient man, but Karen had been testing those limits for months. The sound of a slamming door echoed across the yard, followed by the distinctive clip-clop of Karen's wooden sandals on concrete. Sarah didn't need to look to know the woman was marching toward the fence line for a better view of the empty pool. Sarah Martinez. Karen's voice carried across the yard like a rusty blade. I know you're out there. Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus, who rolled his eyes and reached for his iced tea. Here we go. What did you do with all that water? Karen called out, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the neighboring houses. You can't just dump 20,000 gallons into the sewer system without permits. Actually, Sarah thought you could. She'd checked thoroughly. Emma started to stand, but Sarah caught her arm. Let me handle this. Sarah walked to the fence line, where she could see Karen's red face peering over the top edge. The woman was indeed standing on a stepladder, which struck Sarah as both pathetic and oddly dangerous. Is there something you need, Karen? I need to know what you did with that water. Karen snapped. You can't just drain a pool whenever you feel like it. There are regulations. Environmental concerns. You're absolutely right, Sarah said, calmly. There are regulations, which is why I obtained the proper permits before beginning any work on my pool. That was technically true, though the permits were for the fictional repairs, not the draining itself. Karen's eyes narrowed. What kind of repairs required draining the entire pool? The kind that are none of your business, Sarah replied, her voice still pleasant but with steel underneath. We'll see about that, Karen muttered, but she was already climbing down from her ladder. Sarah returned to the patio, where Marcus and Emma were watching with a mixture of amusement and concern. She's going to call the cops, Emma predicted. Probably, Sarah agreed. In fact, I'm counting on it. Marcus frowned. Sarah, what exactly are you planning? Before she could answer, the sound of sirens filled the air. Not the distant wail of emergency vehicles heading somewhere else, but the sharp, immediate sound of police cars turning into their neighborhood. Emma's eyes widened. Holy shit, she actually did it. Language, Marcus said automatically, but his attention was focused on his wife. Sarah. 2 patrol cars pulled into their driveway, followed by a third that parked on the street. 6 officers emerged, their faces professionally neutral but alert. Sarah recognized the lead officer, Detective Rivera, who'd been patient and professional. During Karen's previous complaints, Karen appeared at her front door, still wearing her wooden sandals and a vindictive smile. She'd changed into a crisp white blouse and navy slacks, as if she'd dressed for the occasion. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Rivera called out as he approached the backyard gate. We received a complaint about illegal water dumping. Mind if we take a look? Of course not, Sarah said, opening the gate wide. Please, come in. The officers filed into the backyard, their boots crunching on the dry grass. Detective Rivera surveyed the empty pool, making notes in a small notebook. The complaint alleges you dumped approximately 20,000 gallons of water into the city sewer system without proper permits or environmental impact assessment, he said. Can you tell me about that? Sarah nodded toward Marcus, who disappeared into the house and returned with a manila folder thick with documents. Pool drainage permit, obtained last Tuesday, Sarah said, handing over the first set of papers. Environmental impact waiver for residential pool maintenance, approved Wednesday. Sewer discharge permit, approved Thursday morning. Detective Rivera flipped through the documents, his expression growing more skeptical with each page. These are all very recent. I'm a thorough planner, Sarah replied. And expensive, another officer muttered, looking at the permit fees listed on the forms. Karen had apparently grown tired of watching from her front porch and was now standing at the fence line, her face flushed with heat and indignation. Ask her why she need. The pool repair crew arrived Monday morning at exactly 7:30, just as Sarah had requested. She watched from her kitchen window as three men in matching blue uniforms unloaded equipment from their truck, jackhammers, concrete mixers, and enough power tools to wake the entire neighborhood. Perfect. Miguel Santos, Santos Pool Restoration, the foreman introduced himself, his weathered hand firm in Sarah's grip. You said on the phone this was an urgent structural repair. That's right. Sarah led him to the backyard, where the empty pool sat like a concrete crater in the morning sun. Multiple stress fractures in the foundation. I'm concerned about complete structural failure. Miguel knelt at the pool's edge, running his fingers along the hairline cracks Sarah had so carefully created. His expression grew increasingly puzzled. As he examined the damage, these cracks, they are very shallow. Surface level, really. You could patch these with simple concrete filler and have the pool refilled by this afternoon. Sarah had anticipated this response. She pulled out her phone and showed Miguel a series of photos she doctored the night before, images of the same cracks, but digitally enhanced to look deeper and more extensive. These were taken with a specialized camera that shows subsurface damage, she said smoothly. The cracks go much deeper than they appear. I need you to excavate the entire pool floor and install a new foundation layer. 6 inches deep, minimum. Miguel studied the photos, his frown deepening. This kind of excavation, you're talking about $40,000 minimum. Maybe more. Are you sure your insurance won't cover a simpler repair? Money isn't an issue, Sarah replied. And I need this done quickly. Can you complete the excavation this week? Well, yes, but then let's get started. From her position at the fence line, Sarah could practically feel Karen's presence without even looking. Came the sound of a screen door slamming. Karen was undoubtedly preparing for another day of surveillance, probably with her phone ready to document whatever suspicious activity she could manufacture. Let her watch, Sarah thought. She was about to get quite an education. Miguel's crew worked with impressive efficiency. By 10 a.m., the screaming whine of jackhammers filled the air as they began breaking up the pool's concrete floor. The noise was tremendous, a constant, bone-rattling assault that had neighbors stepping onto their porches to investigate. Sarah positioned herself on the patio with a cup of coffee and her laptop, playing the role of concerned homeowner overseeing necessary repairs. Every few minutes, she'd walk to the pool's edge and point at various spots, giving Miguel direction about where to focus the excavation. Deeper there, she'd say, pointing to the shallow end. I want to make sure we get all the compromised concrete. What she was really doing was mapping out precise coordinates based on measurements she'd taken months ago. Every instruction to the crew was calculated to bring them closer to her true objective. Around 11:30, Karen appeared at the fence line. Today she'd dispensed with the stepladder and was instead pressing her face against the gaps between the wooden slats, trying to get a better view of the work. Excuse me. Karen called out over the noise of the jackhammers. Excuse me. Miguel looked up from his work, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the early hour. What exactly are you doing to that pool? Karen demanded. That noise is disturbing the entire neighborhood. Miguel glanced at Sarah, who nodded permission for him to respond. Foundation repair. Major structural damage. Safety issue. Safety issue. Karen's voice pitched higher. That pool was fine last week. I've been watching it every day. You've been watching my pool every day? Sarah asked, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the other neighbors could hear. Every day. Karen. Really? Several neighbors had indeed emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down was watering her drought-resistant garden, but Sarah could see her attention focused entirely on the drama unfolding between the 2 properties. The Johnsons across the street were pretending to wash their car while clearly eavesdropping on every word. Karen's face flushed red. I'm not watching anything. I just happened to notice things from my own property. Things like what? Sarah pressed. You called the police yesterday claiming I was hiding something. What exactly did you think I was hiding? Hey you. Karen sputtered, realizing she'd backed herself into a corner. You drained that pool for no good reason. No. Good reason. Sarah gestured toward the excavation site, where Miguel's crew had now broken through the concrete and were scooping out chunks of debris. Structural damage isn't a good reason. My daughter's safety isn't a good reason. The jackhammers had stopped, and Karen's voice carried clearly across the yard. There was nothing wrong with that pool. According to who? Sarah asked. Are you a structural engineer, Karen? Do you have expertise in concrete failure analysis? Or are you just making assumptions based on your daily surveillance of my property? Mrs. Chen had abandoned all pretense of gardening and was now openly staring. The Johnsons had given up on their car entirely. Even Mr. Peterson from the corner house had come out to see what was happening. Karen realized she had an audience and seemed to gather confidence from it. I know what I see. And what I see is suspicious behavior from someone who's clearly trying to hide something. Like what? Sarah demanded. What could I possibly be hiding in a swimming pool that would require calling the police? I don't know. Karen shouted. But normal people don't act like this. Normal people don't spy on their neighbors every day, Sarah shot back. Normal people don't file false police reports. Normal people don't harass families trying to maintain their property. I haven't harassed anyone. Really? Sarah pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her documentation. 6 calls to the city inspector. 4 complaints to the HOA. 2 reports to the police. Anonymous tips to my daughter's school counselor. Complaints to the mail carrier. About our packages. Should I continue? The gathered neighbors were now murmuring among themselves, and Sarah could see the tide of public opinion shifting. Karen's behavior, which might have seemed merely eccentric before, was starting to look genuinely unhinged when laid out in such detail. Karen seemed to sense she was losing control of the narrative. You're twisting everything. I'm just trying to protect this neighborhood. From what? Sarah asked. From a mother getting her pool repaired. From a family who keeps to themselves and bothers no one. What exactly are you protecting us from, Karen? Miguel cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Martinez, should we continue with the excavation? Please do, Sarah said. Don't let this interruption delay the work. As the jackhammers roared back to life, Karen retreated to her house, but Sarah could see her face in the window, watching with undisguised fury. By early afternoon, Miguel's crew had excavated nearly half the pool floor. The concrete debris filled a growing pile next to the house, and the excavated area revealed dark, packed earth underneath. We are hitting some unusual soil composition. Down here, Miguel called out during a break. Looks like this area might have been disturbed before. Maybe old construction or landscaping work. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. The previous owners did a lot of yard work. Just keep going according to the specifications. Yes, ma'am. But I have to ask, some of this soil looks like it's been moved relatively recently. Maybe within the last few years. We are finding layers that don't match the natural soil composition. Is that a problem for the foundation work? Sarah asked. No, not necessarily. Just unusual. We'll need to compact everything thoroughly before we pour the new concrete. As the afternoon wore on, Miguel's crew continued their methodical excavation. With each scoop of the excavator, they removed another layer of dirt, working their way toward the precise coordinates Sarah had calculated months ago. Emma came home from her summer job around 4, stopping short when she saw the destruction. In the backyard. Holy crap, Mom. You really went all out with this fake repair thing. Language, Sarah said automatically, but her attention was focused on the excavation site. They were getting close now. Very close. Seriously though, Emma continued, settling into a patio chair with a bottle of water. Karen looked like she was about to have a stroke this morning. Mrs. Chen told me Karen spent the whole day taking pictures of the work crew and muttering about calling the FBI. The FBI? Sarah laughed, but it sounded strained even to her own ears. Yeah, apparently she thinks you're involved in some kind of federal crime. Money laundering or drug trafficking or something equally insane. If only she knew, Sarah thought. Marcus arrived home just as Miguel's crew was packing up for the day. He surveyed the excavation site with the practiced eye of an engineer, noting the precise edges and carefully planned excavation pattern. "This is more extensive than I expected," he said quietly once the workers had left. "It needs to be thorough," Sarah replied. "Sarah, what exactly are we doing here?" Before she could answer, Emma pointed toward the fence line. "Hello, Karen's." "Incoming." Karen emerged from her house carrying what appeared to be a manila folder stuffed with documents. She marched to the fence line with military precision, her wooden sandals clicking against the concrete like a countdown time. She sat at her kitchen table in the darkness, nursing her fourth cup of coffee and staring out at the excavation site. The half-dug pool looked like an open wound in the moonlight, accusatory and dangerous. In 6 hours, the city inspectors would arrive. In 6 hours, everything she'd worked to protect could be destroyed. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Marcus had gone to bed around midnight, but not before cornering her in the hallway. "I know you, Sarah," he'd whispered, his engineer's mind churning through possibilities. "You don't spend $40,000 on unnecessary pool repairs. You don't hire unlicensed contractors unless you need someone who won't ask questions. What did you bury under there?" She'd kissed his forehead and promised they'd talk in the morning. But morning was coming fast, and Sarah still didn't know what she was going to tell him. The truth? That was impossible. The truth would destroy him, destroy Emma, destroy everything they'd built together. The lie? She'd already told so many lies that she was losing track of which version of reality she'd presented to whom. At 4 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text message. "Need to talk. Come outside." Sarah frowned. Marcus was upstairs, asleep. Unless. She peered out the kitchen window and saw Miguel Santos standing beside his truck at the curb, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. What was he doing here at 4 in the morning? Sarah slipped out the back door and walked around to the front yard, her bare feet silent on the cool concrete. Miguel looked exhausted, his work clothes rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "We need to talk," Miguel said, glancing nervously toward Karen's house. "About what we found yesterday." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but I've been doing this work for 15 years. I know the difference between structural damage and something else." "I don't know what you're talking about. The bones," Miguel interrupted quietly. "We found bones, Mrs. Martinez. Human bones." The world tilted sideways. Sarah grabbed the side of Miguel's truck to steady herself. That's impossible," she stammered. "Is it?" Miguel's voice was carefully neutral. "Because my crew found what looks like a femur about 3 feet down in the southwest corner, right where you kept directing us to dig deeper." Sarah's mind raced. The bones weren't supposed to be that shallow. She'd measured carefully, calculated the depth, made sure they were buried deep enough that normal pool maintenance would never disturb them. But 5 years of settling soil, rain, and ground shift could have moved things. Changed the calculations. "We covered it back up," Miguel continued. "Told the crew it was probably an old pet burial. But that bone was too big for a dog, Mrs. Martinez. And it was too fresh to be an old Indian burial or something." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "I want to know what I've gotten myself into," Miguel said. "Because when those city inspectors show up this morning, they're going to want to examine every inch of that excavation. And if they find what we found..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "How much?" Sarah asked. "What?" "How much money? Do you want to forget what you saw?" Miguel stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah realized she'd just confirmed every suspicion he'd had. "Lady, I got 3 kids and a sick wife. I can't afford to get mixed up in whatever this is." "Then, what do you suggest?" "You got 2 choices," Miguel said. "Either you figure out a way to make this go away before the inspectors arrive, or I'm going to have to tell them what we found. You'll lose your business. Karen already figured out your license is expired. Better than losing my freedom." Miguel replied, "I've seen enough cop shows to know that helping someone cover up a murder is accessory after the fact." "Murder?" The word hung in the air between them like a physical presence. It wasn't murder, Sarah said quietly. Then what was it? Sarah looked back toward her house, where her family slept peacefully, unaware that their lives were about to implode. Where Emma dreamed about college applications and boys and a future that might not exist if the truth came out. An accident, she whispered. Miguel's expression softened slightly. Tell me. And despite every instinct screaming at her to stay silent, Sarah found herself talking. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the relief of finally telling someone the truth, but the words came pouring out. 5 years ago, when we first moved in, the previous owner was still living here. Richard Bellman. He was supposed to move out before we took possession, but he kept delaying. Legal problems, financial issues. Finally, he agreed to rent the guest house for a few months while he got his affairs in order. Miguel was listening. Intently, his expression unreadable. He was troubled, drinking heavily, angry about losing the house. He'd make inappropriate comments about Emma, who was only 11 then. Follow me around the yard making suggestions about how I should dress, how I should behave. Why didn't you call the police? We tried, but he wasn't technically threatening anyone. Just creepy. Boundary crossing. The kind of behavior that makes your skin crawl but doesn't rise to the level of criminal harassment. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the feeling of being watched constantly, of checking locks twice and keeping the curtains drawn. It got worse after Marcus started traveling for work. Richard would knock on the door at all hours, claiming he needed to check something in the house. He had keys from when he owned the place, and I was never sure if he'd made copies. So what happened? One night in July, I was up late working on my laptop. Emma was at a sleepover. Marcus was in Denver on business. I heard someone in the pool area around midnight. Sarah closed her eyes, but the memory was as vivid as ever. I looked out and saw Richard in the pool, fully clothed. He was stumbling around in the shallow end, clearly drunk, muttering to himself. I thought about just leaving him alone, but I was worried he might drown. You went outside. I went outside, Sarah confirmed. I tried to get him to come out of the pool. He started saying things about Emma, about me, graphic, violent things. I told him he needed to leave, that I was calling the police. And he lunged at me, lost his footing on the pool steps and went backwards, hard. His head hit the concrete edge with this sound, like a melon dropping. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. And he died. Not immediately. He was unconscious, bleeding into the pool water. I called 911, but it took them 18 minutes to get here. By the time they arrived, he was gone. So why didn't you report it as an accident? Sarah laughed bitterly. Because when the paramedics got here, Richard wasn't in the pool anymore. Miguel's eyes widened. What? I panicked. A drunk man dead in my pool, with a history of making my family uncomfortable, while my husband was out of town and I was alone with my 11-year-old daughter. I imagined the investigation, the questions, the media attention, Emma having to testify about his inappropriate behavior, our new life in this neighborhood destroyed before it even started. So you moved the body. I dragged him into the garage and told the paramedics it was a false alarm. Said I thought I saw someone in the pool, but it turned out to be just shadows. They left, and I did what I thought I had to do. Sarah looked toward the excavation site, where Richard Bellman had been buried for 5 years under tons of concrete and chlorinated water. I dug a grave that same night, put him in the deep end of the pool and covered him with dirt, then had the pool company pour a new concrete bottom the next week. Told them I wanted a completely fresh start. Miguel was staring at her with a mixture of horror and fascination, and no one ever looked for him. Richard was estranged from his family, had a history of disappearing for weeks at a time. His ex-wife figured he'd moved to Mexico like he'd always threatened to do. The police did a minimal missing person investigation, but there was no evidence of foul play. Just another middle-aged man who walked away from his problems. The eastern sky was starting to lighten, and Sarah realized they'd been talking for almost an hour. So you see, she said, it really was an accident. But try explaining that after hiding the body for 5 years, Try explaining that to Emma, who's never known any of this happened. Try explaining that to Marcus, who spent 5 years swimming over a grave. Miguel rubbed his face with both hands. Jesus Christ, lady, you're asking me to be an accessory to covering up a death. I'm asking you to help me protect my family, Sarah corrected. Richard Bellman was a predator who died because he couldn't take no for an answer. His death was an accident, but his burial, that was a mother protecting her child. And what happens when those inspectors show up in 2 hours? Sarah had been thinking about that all night. We give them exactly what they expect to find. Which is environmental contamination from the old development project, hazardous materials that require specialized disposal. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Miguel a series of documents she'd been preparing since midnight. Contaminated soil samples that will require the excavation to be suspended pending EPA review. Miguel studied the fake lab reports, impressed despite himself. You made these tonight. I used to work in environmental consulting before Emma was born. I know exactly what kind of paperwork would shut down a dig site and buy us time. By 8 a.m., Sarah's backyard looked like the staging area for a federal investigation. 3 city inspectors had arrived first, followed by 2 EPA officials in matching windbreakers, then a county environmental specialist carrying enough testing equipment to stock a laboratory. Karen stood at her fence line like a general surveying her troops, practically vibrating with vindictive satisfaction. Mrs. Martinez, the lead EPA official, Agent Patricia Wells, approached Sarah with a clipboard. Thick with forms. We understand you've been conducting unauthorized excavation on property with potential environmental contamination issues. I wasn't aware of any contamination issues, Sarah replied, playing her role perfectly. I was told this was standard pool repair work. Agent Wells consulted her notes. According to our records, this property was part of the Riverside Development Project, which was shut down in 1987 due to improper disposal of construction materials. That includes potential asbestos, lead paint, and other hazardous substances. Sarah widened her eyes in apparent shock. Hazardous substances? But we've been living here for 5 years. Swimming in that pool. My daughter. We'll need to conduct comprehensive testing, Agent Wells assured her. But first, we need to examine what's already been excavated. Miguel had arrived 20 minutes earlier and was now standing beside the pool with his crew, looking appropriately concerned. Sarah caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. We stopped work yesterday afternoon when we started finding unusual materials in the soil, Miguel announced. Looked like old construction debris, possibly contaminated. What kind of debris? Asked Inspector Davidson from the city. Miguel led the group to the excavation site, where he'd carefully arranged several chunks of old concrete, rusted metal, and what appeared to be degraded insulation material. Mostly concrete fragments, but some of this insulation looks like it might contain asbestos, Miguel said, pointing to a piece of material he'd sourced from a demolition site the night before. My guys know not to disturb potential hazmat without proper equipment. Agent Wells knelt beside the excavated area, taking photos with a specialized camera. We'll need soil samples from multiple depth levels. And we'll need to suspend all further excavation until we can determine the extent of contamination. How long will that take? Sarah asked, injecting just the right amount of anxiety into her voice. Could be several weeks, maybe months if we find significant contamination. From the fence line, Karen's triumphant expression was beginning to fade. This wasn't the quick vindication she'd been expecting. But what about the unauthorized contractor? Karen called out. What about the missing permits? Inspector Davidson consulted his tablet. Mr. Santos, we show your contractor's license as expired. Miguel hung his head in apparent shame. Yes, sir. Financial difficulties. I was trying to keep my crew working while I sorted out the renewal paperwork. That's a serious violation, Davidson said. We'll need to discuss penalties and proper procedures going forward. I understand, Miguel replied. I'm willing to cooperate fully with the investigation. Sarah watched the performance unfold with professional admiration. Miguel was hitting every note perfectly, contrite but cooperative, concerned about safety, but not overly knowledgeable about the technical details. Agent Wells stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. Mrs. Martinez, We are going to need you and your family to vacate the property for at least 72 hours while we conduct initial testing. Vacate? Sarah's surprise was genuine this time. Where are we supposed to go? A hotel, family members, wherever you're comfortable. But this is a potential health hazard. We can't allow continued occupancy until we know what we are dealing with. Behind them, Sarah could hear Karen's sputtering protests. This was clearly not the outcome she'd envisioned. This is ridiculous. Karen called out, "You're treating this like some kind of toxic waste site. It's a swimming pool." Agent Wells replied patiently. Environmental contamination is a serious matter. We follow strict protocols regardless of the property type. But I've been researching this for days. The real issue is a suspicious behavior, not some made-up contamination. Inspector Davidson turned to face Karen fully. Are you suggesting we ignore potential environmental hazards based on your personal suspicions about your neighbor? Karen's face flushed red. I'm saying you're being manipulated. She planned this whole thing. Planned what, exactly? Agent Wells asked. Planned for her property to be contaminated with hazardous materials. No, she planned. Karen floundered, realizing how conspiracy-minded she sounded to professional investigators. Sarah stepped forward, her expression perfectly concerned. Agent Wells, I'm worried about my neighbor's mental state. She's been obsessively monitoring our property for months, making bizarre accusations. I'm starting to think she might need professional help. I do not need professional help. Karen shrieked. I need you people to do your jobs and investigate the real crime here. The assembled officials exchanged glances, and Sarah could see them mentally filing Karen under difficult civilian. Mrs. Whitmore, Inspector Davidson said firmly, we appreciate your civic engagement, but we need you to let us conduct our investigation without interference. As the morning wore on, the officials methodically documented everything in the excavation site. They took soil samples, photographed the debris Miguel had planted, and measured contamination levels with sophisticated equipment. Sarah's fake environmental reports, which she discreetly placed in the mailbox earlier that morning, were discovered by Agent Wells around 10:30. Mrs. Martinez, did you commission any environmental testing on your property? Wells asked, holding up the manila envelope. Testing? No, why? We found these soil analysis reports in your mailbox. They indicate significant contamination levels throughout your property. Sarah took the papers, scanning them with apparent confusion. I've never seen these before. Who would send us environmental reports? The letterhead indicates they're from Southwest Environmental Services, Wells said. A legitimate testing company. But there's no work order number or client information. Miguel cleared his throat. Could be the previous owner had testing done and the reports got delayed in the mail? I've seen that happen before. Agent Wells frowned. These are dated last week. Well, Sarah said slowly, we have been having some strange smells in the backyard lately, and some discoloration in the pool water before I drained it. I just assumed it was algae or chemical imbalance. Strange smells. Wells made a note. Can you describe them? Sarah had researched this carefully. Kind of a chemical smell. Sweet but acrid. Emma mentioned it too, didn't you, honey? Emma, who had emerged from the house an hour earlier and was now watching the proceedings with fascination, nodded on cue. Yeah, it was gross. Made me feel kind of nauseous. Agent Wells's expression grew more serious. Those symptoms could be consistent with volatile organic compound exposure. We'll need to expedite our testing. By noon, the backyard was cordoned off with yellow tape and warning signs. The officials had collected dozens of soil samples and were packing up their equipment with promises to return the next day with specialized detection gear. Remember, Agent Wells told Sarah as she prepared to leave, no one enters the contaminated area until we complete our assessment. This is for your family's safety. Of course, Sarah replied. We'll stay at my sister's place until you give us the all clear. As the official vehicles pulled away, Karen stood at her fence line looking stunned. Her moment of triumph had transformed into a bureaucratic nightmare that would drag on for months. This isn't over, Karen called out as Sarah loaded suitcases into her car. I know you're hiding something, and I'm going to prove it. Karen. Sarah replied gently, maybe you should talk to someone. This level of obsession isn't healthy. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. I know what I know. Sarah got into her car without responding, but as she drove away, she caught sight of Karen in her rearview mirror, still standing at the fence line, still watching. That evening, Sarah sat in a generic hotel room 20 miles away, reviewing her performance. Phase 1 had been flawless. The inspectors were convinced they were dealing with environmental contamination. The property was officially off limits, and Karen had been marginalized as an unreliable witness. But as she looked at Emma doing homework on the hotel bed and Marcus pacing by the window, Sarah realized the hardest part was yet to come. Mom, Emma said without looking up from her textbook, why do I feel like you're not telling us everything? Marcus stopped pacing and fixed Sarah with his engineer stare. Because she's not. Sarah felt the weight of their expectation, their trust, their love. For 5 years, she'd protected them from the truth. But sitting in this sterile hotel room, watching her family's life get turned upside down by forces they didn't understand, she wondered if she'd been protecting them or just protecting herself. You're right, Sarah said quietly. There's more to this story. Emma looked up from her homework, suddenly alert. Marcus sat down in the chair across from her, his expression serious but patient. 5 years ago, when we first moved into the house, something happened, Sarah began. Something I've never told you about. And for the second time in 24 hours, Sarah found hers.